The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun hung low enough to turn the dust motes in the Humboldt, Nevada post office into dancing specks of gold. And Zelda Owens had to hold the envelope 3 inches from her nose to make out the return address. Her eyes had been failing for 2 years now, ever since her 23rd birthday, when she first noticed the world growing softer around the edges. But she refused to let anyone know the full extent of it, because the postmistress position was the only thing standing between her and complete destitution in this unforgiving town. She squinted at the careful handwriting, making out enough to know it was addressed to Mrs. Patricia Henshaw, the banker's wife who lived in the White House on the hill, and Zelda filed it carefully in the proper slot before turning back to sort through the rest of the mail that had come in on the morning stage. Her fingers traced the addresses, feeling for the raised ink that helped her more than sight did these days, and she worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had memorized every family name in Humboldt and could navigate the sorting boxes by touch alone. The door creaked open and she heard boots on the wooden floor, heavy and deliberate, and she looked up to see a tall shape backlit by the afternoon sun. She blinked hard, trying to bring the figure into focus, but all she could make out was the silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat. "Help you?" She called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mail for the Quinn Ranch," the man said, and his voice was deep and warm like whiskey left sitting in a glass. "Been out on a cattle drive for 3 months, expecting some letters." Zelda turned to the Q section, her fingers flying over the slots until she found the thick bundle she had been setting aside for weeks. "Quinn," she murmured, pulling them out. "First initial, Jacob Quinn." She held the letters close to her face, close enough that she could smell the paper and ink, and she confirmed the name before holding them out in his general direction. She felt him take them from her hands, his fingers rough and calloused, and she heard the rustle of paper as he flipped through them. 17 letters, he said, and there was something bemused in his tone. "My sister writes more than I expected." "Your sister has been very concerned," Zelda said, relaxing a fraction. She had been the one receiving those letters, stamping them, filing them away, and she had noticed the increasingly worried tone in the handwriting itself, the way the letters seemed to slant more urgently as the weeks passed. "She came by twice asking if I had heard anything." "I will head out there now," Jacob said, but he did not move immediately. "You are Miss Owens?" "Yes." She tilted her head, trying to bring him into better focus, but it was useless. He was just a tall blur of brown and blue with a hat on top. "My sister mentioned you, said you were the most efficient postmistress Humboldt ever had." Zelda felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I just do my job. Must be hard work, sorting through everyone's business." "I do not read the letters," she said quickly, defensively. "I just make sure they get where they need to go." Did not mean to imply otherwise. There was a pause, and she heard him shift his weight. "Thank you for keeping these safe." After he left, Zelda stood very still in the empty post office and pressed her palms against the smooth wood of the counter. Her eyes ached the way they always did by afternoon, a deep throb that started behind her temples and spread forward until even closing her eyes brought no relief. The doctor in Winnemucca had told her the condition would continue to worsen, that eventually she would lose her sight entirely, but he had no cure and no timeline. It could be years. It could be months. She could not afford to lose this position. Her parents were dead, killed in a wagon accident when she was 19, and she had no siblings, no husband, no one to fall back on. The town council paid her $40 a month to run the post office, and she lived in the small room at the back of the building rent-free. It was not much, but it was survival. The next morning, Jacob Quinn returned. Zelda was kneeling on the floor, organizing a shipment of packages that had arrived on the early stage when she heard the door open. She looked up, squinting against the light, and saw the same tall figure from yesterday. "Morning," he said, "morning." She got to her feet, brushing dust from her dark blue skirt. "Did you need something else?" "My sister asked me to come help you," he said, and there was something apologetic in his tone. "Said the post office could use an extra pair of hands with all the holiday mail coming in." Zelda stiffened. "I am managing perfectly fine on my own. Did not say you were not." He took off his hat, and she could make out the shape of dark hair, though his features remained frustratingly blurred. "But Sarah said you have been working from dawn until past dark every day, and she worries you will run yourself into the ground. Sarah should mind her own business." "Sarah is my sister. Minding other people's business is what she does best." There was humor in his voice, gentle and not unkind. "Look, I am between jobs until spring. The ranch does not need me until we start planning the next drive. Let me help sort mail for a few hours a day. You do not even have to pay me. The town council would never approve an assistant. Then do not tell them I am your assistant. Tell them I am just a concerned citizen volunteering my time." Zelda wanted to refuse, wanted to send him away and prove she could handle everything herself, but the truth was she was exhausted. The mail volume had been increasing as families sent letters and packages for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and she had been staying up past midnight every night trying to sort it all by candlelight, holding each piece of mail so close to the flame she was terrified she would set something on fire. "Fine," she said at last, "but just for a few hours, and you follow my system exactly." "Yes, madam." He was surprisingly good at it. She explained her organizational method once, and he grasped it immediately, his large hands sorting through envelopes with unexpected care. He did not ask questions about her eyesight, though she caught him watching her sometimes when she held letters close to her face, and she appreciated his silence more than she could express. On the third day, he found her sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. "Miss Owens." She looked up quickly, trying to compose herself, but she knew her eyes were red from strain and frustration. "I am fine." "You do not look fine." He approached slowly, like someone approaching a spooked horse. "What is wrong?" "Nothing. Just a headache." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, very carefully, "Is it getting worse?" She could have lied. She should have lied. But something about the genuine concern in his voice, the lack of judgment, made her tell the truth. "Yes." Jacob pulled up the other chair and sat down across from her. This close, she could almost make out his features, though everything was still soft and undefined. "What does the doctor say?" "That there is nothing to be done, that I should prepare for eventual blindness." The words tasted bitter. "But I cannot afford to prepare. I need this job." "Does the town council know?" "No, and they cannot know. If they think I cannot do the work, they will replace me, and then I will have nothing." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if you had help? Someone who could read the addresses to you, write out receipts, handle the things that require clear vision." "I told you, they will not pay for an assistant." "I am not asking for pay." She shook her head. "I cannot accept charity. It is not charity, it is one person helping another." He leaned forward, and she caught a glimpse of dark eyes, serious and steady. "My sister told me about you, Miss Owens. About how you came to every house in Humboldt when the influenza outbreak happened 2 years ago, delivering mail and medicine and food to people too sick to leave their beds. About how you organized a collection for the Henderson family when their barn burned down. You help people. Let someone help you for once." Zelda felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. "Why do you care?" "Because I know what it is like to feel like you have to do everything alone," he said quietly. "And I know it does not have to be that way. So Jacob Quinn became a permanent fixture in the Humboldt post office. He arrived every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, sorting mail and reading addresses and writing out receipts in his clear, careful handwriting. Zelda directed him, her memory and organizational skills sharp even as her vision failed, and together they formed an efficient team. It was on a cold December morning, 2 weeks before Christmas, when the letter arrived that changed everything. "Package for you," Jacob said, holding up a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Return address from San Francisco." Zelda took it, running her fingers over the wrapping until she found the string. She pulled it open to find a letter inside, written in handwriting she did not recognize. "Can you read it to me?" Jacob opened the letter and began reading in his steady voice. "Dear Miss Owens, my name is Margaret Thornton. I am writing to you regarding a matter of some delicacy. Your cousin, Thomas Owens, recently passed away in San Francisco, and in his will he left a sum of $300 to be sent to his cousin Zelda Owens of Humboldt, Nevada. I am the executor of his estate, and I have enclosed a bank draft for the full amount. Please accept my condolences for your loss. Sincerely, Margaret Thornton." Zelda sat down heavily. "Thomas, you knew him?" "Barely. He was my father's cousin's son. I met him once when I was a child." She pressed her hand to her mouth. $300. That is a significant sum. That is 6 months of salary. She felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from grief for a cousin she barely knew or relief at this unexpected windfall, she could not say. "I could see the specialist in Sacramento, the one Dr. Morrison mentioned, the one who might be able to help." Jacob folded the letter carefully. "Then you should go. But the post office will be fine for a week or two. I can handle things here. The town council will not even notice you are gone. I know your system inside and out now. I can manage." He paused. "You have to take this chance, Miss Owens. If there is even a possibility of saving your sight, you have to try." She left on the Monday morning stage, bundled against the December cold, with the bank draft sewn into the lining of her coat and a small carpet bag containing 2 dresses and her mother's Bible. Jacob saw her off, standing on the platform outside the post office, and she wished desperately that she could see his face clearly one last time. "I will write," she said, "to let you know what the specialist says." "I will be waiting," he replied. Sacramento in December was cold and damp, the streets muddy from recent rain, and Zelda spent 2 days finding her way to the specialist's office, only to wait another 3 days for an appointment. Dr. Harrington was a brusque man with cold hands and a German accent, and he examined her eyes with a series of lenses and bright lights that made her head throb. "Progressive myopia," he said finally. "Degenerative. There is some experimental work being done with corrective lenses in Europe, but nothing proven. I can fit you with spectacles that may help slow the progression, but I cannot stop it." The spectacles cost $60, an extravagant sum that made her hands shake as she counted out the bills. But when Dr. Harrington fitted them onto her face and she looked up and saw the room come into sharp, clear focus for the first time in 2 years, she gasped aloud. "How is that?" he asked. "I can see," she whispered. "I can see the clock on the wall. I can see the books on your shelf. I can see your face." "The spectacles will help for now," he cautioned, "but the condition will continue to progress. You will need stronger lenses eventually, and there may come a time when even the strongest lenses will not be enough. But for now, this should give you back most of your vision." Zelda wore the spectacles out of his office and spent the rest of the afternoon walking through Sacramento in a daze of wonder. She had forgotten how detailed the world was, how many colors and textures existed that she had been missing. She saw the individual shingles on roofs, the expressions on people's faces, the lettering on shop signs. That evening, sitting in her small hotel room, she pulled out paper and pen and began to write. Dear Mr. Quinn, I am writing to inform you that I have seen the specialist, and he has fitted me with spectacles that have restored most of my vision. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your encouragement to make this trip, or for your willingness to manage the post office in my absence. I will return to Humboldt on the Thursday stage. I look forward to seeing you properly for the first time. Sincerely, Zelda Owens. She posted the letter the next morning and spent the remaining days in Sacramento, shopping carefully with her remaining money, buying small gifts for the few people in Humboldt she considered friends. For Jacob, she purchased a leather-bound journal with blank pages, thinking of how much care he put into his handwriting. The stage ride back to Humboldt felt longer than the journey out, even though Zelda spent most of it staring out the window at the landscape she had been seeing only as vague shapes and colors for so long. The mountains in the distance, the scrub brush dotting the desert, the occasional ranch house sitting alone in the vastness, all of it sharp and clear and beautiful. When the stage pulled into Humboldt on Thursday afternoon, she stepped down and looked around with new eyes. The town was smaller than she remembered, more weathered, but also more detailed. She could see the grain in the wooden sidewalks, the peeling paint on the general store, the individual stones in the street, and she could see Jacob Quinn standing outside the post office, waiting. He was tall, as she had known, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who spent his life working outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and it curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was tanned from the sun, with strong features and dark eyes that widened when he saw her approaching. "Miss Owens," he said, and his voice was the same warm rumble she remembered, but now she could see his mouth forming the words, see the slight smile that curved his lips. "Mr. Quinn." She stopped in front of him, suddenly shy. "Thank you for managing things. It was no trouble." He was staring at her, and she realized he was seeing her properly for the first time too. "The spectacles, they work better than I hoped." She adjusted them self-consciously. "I can see everything now, including you." Something shifted in his expression, something warm and hesitant. "And what do you think?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I think you look exactly like you sound." "Is that good or bad?" "Good," she said softly. "Very good." They stood there for a moment, the December wind cold around them, and Zelda realized with a start that something had changed between them. It was not just that she could see him now. It was that she had been half in love with his voice and his kindness and his steady presence for weeks, and now that she could see his face, see the way he looked at her like she was something precious, that half-love was rapidly becoming whole. Over the following weeks, their partnership in the post office deepened into something more. Jacob still arrived every morning at 8, but now he often brought fresh bread from the bakery or apples from the general store, and they ate breakfast together at her small desk in the back room. They worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same stack of letters, and each touch sent electricity up Zelda's arms. She learned things about him slowly, in pieces. He was 26, 3 years older than her. He had been born in Missouri, but came west with his family as a teenager, seeking opportunity in the silver mines. His father had died in a mining accident, and Jacob had turned to ranching to support his mother and younger sister. He loved horses and open spaces and the particular quality of light just after sunset. He read poetry, though he would never admit it to the other ranch hands. He had a scar on his left hand from a branding iron and another on his ribs from a bull that got angry. He learned about her too. How she had taught herself to read from her mother's Bible. How she loved thunderstorms and the smell of sagebrush after rain. How she had wanted to be a teacher before her parents died, and circumstances forced her into the postmistress position instead. How she was terrified of ending up alone and forgotten in this hard land. "You could never be forgotten," Jacob said one evening in mid-January. They were working late, sorting through a particularly large shipment of mail, and the lamplight cast warm shadows across his face. "You do not know that." "Yes, I do." He set down the letters he was holding and turned to face her fully. "Zelda, you are the kind of person who leaves an impression. Everyone in this town knows you, respects you. You matter here." She looked down at her hands, feeling vulnerable in a way she had not felt since her parents died. Sometimes mattering is not enough. Sometimes you want to matter to one person more than you matter to everyone else combined. "Do I matter to you?" His voice was quiet, careful. She looked up and met his eyes, dark and steady and full of something that made her heart race. "Yes, you matter to me too," he said, "more than I know how to say properly." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers, and Zelda felt something fundamental shift in her world. This was not just gratitude or friendship or the comfort of companionship. This was love, real and solid and terrifying in its intensity. "Jacob," she whispered. "I know we have not known each other long," he said. "And I know I am just a ranch hand without much to offer, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way about you. Every morning I wake up thinking about seeing you. Every evening I go home wishing I could stay longer. You are the first thing I think about and the last thing I think about and most of the things I think about in between." "You are not just a ranch hand," Zelda said, her voice fierce. "You are kind and patient and smart. You read poetry and care about people, and you saw me when I was failing and you helped me instead of judging me. You are everything." Jacob stood and pulled her to her feet, and then his hands were cupping her face, and he was kissing her with a tenderness that made her want to cry. She kissed him back, her fingers gripping the front of his shirt, and for the first time since her parents died, she felt like she had come home. They courted properly after that, or as properly as they could in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Jacob took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant. They went for walks on Sunday afternoons, following the creek that ran through town out into the open desert. He bought her flowers from the traveling merchant who came through once a month, and she mended his shirts and baked him pies. But they also continued working together in the post office, and it was there, surrounded by other people's words and messages, that Zelda first noticed something odd. "This letter has been here for 2 weeks," she said one morning in February, holding up an envelope addressed to Mrs. Clara Donovan. "Why has Clara not picked it up?" Jacob looked over. "Maybe she does not know it arrived." "I put a notice in her box." Zelda frowned. "And this is the 3rd letter from the same sender, her sister in Denver by the return address. Want me to walk it over to her house?" "Would you mind?" Jacob took the letter and left, and Zelda continued sorting through the mail. But something nagged at her, a sense that she was missing something important. Jacob returned an hour later looking troubled. "What is wrong?" Zelda asked immediately. "Clara Donovan cannot read," he said quietly. "She has been too embarrassed to admit it. She has been collecting the letters because she did not want anyone to know, but she has no idea what they say." Zelda sat down slowly. "Her sister has been writing her for months." "Clara must be desperate to know what the letters say." "She is. Her sister is sick. Clara knows that much because the postmaster in Denver told her before she left to come west, but she does not know how sick or if her sister is asking her to come back or what. This is terrible." Zelda pressed her hand to her mouth. How many other people in Humboldt cannot read their own mail? They spent the rest of the day thinking about it, and by evening they had formed a plan. "We could offer a service," Jacob said, "for people who need help with their letters. Reading them, writing responses. We would keep everything confidential, of course. The town council might object. The town council does not need to know every detail of how we run the post office. As long as the mail gets delivered, they will not care." Zelda worried at her bottom lip. "It feels invasive, reading other people's private letters. It is more invasive letting them remain ignorant of important information because they cannot read," Jacob countered. "We would be helping people." So they started quietly, putting up a small notice in the post office window. "Assistance available for reading and writing letters. Inquire within. Strictest confidence maintained." Clara Donovan was their first client, arriving hesitantly the next afternoon with her stack of unopened envelopes. Zelda sat with her at the desk while Jacob read the letters aloud in his steady voice. The first two were updates from Clara's sister about her life in Denver, cheerful and newsworthy. The third was more serious. "My dear sister, I must inform you that my condition has worsened. The doctor says I have perhaps 6 months remaining. I understand if you cannot come, but I would dearly love to see you one last time before I pass. Please write and let me know your thoughts. With love, Margaret." Clara was crying silently, tears streaming down her weathered face. "When was this letter sent?" Zelda checked the postmark. 3 weeks ago. I have to go to her." Clara looked between them desperately. "But I do not know how to write back to tell her I am coming, and I do not have money for the stage fare." "We can write the letter for you," Zelda said immediately. "And as for the money, the town has a benevolence fund for emergencies. I can speak to Reverend Matthews." By the end of the week, Clara was on a stage to Denver with a letter of response in her pocket and $40 from the church benevolence fund. But more importantly, word had spread about the service Zelda and Jacob offered, and more people started coming. Old Tom Morrison, who had been too proud to admit he never learned his letters, brought in a legal document he needed to understand. Sarah Yates, Jacob's sister, came in with a letter from a friend in San Francisco and asked Jacob to write a response because her handwriting was illegible even to herself. Even the banker, Mr. Henshaw, came in with a complicated business letter in German and asked if either of them could translate it. "This is becoming more than a side service," Jacob said one evening as they locked up the post office. "We are becoming scribes for half the town." "Is that bad?" Zelda asked. "No." He smiled at her, and her heart did its usual flip at the sight. "It is good. It is more than good. We are making a real difference." March came in cold and windy, and with it came a letter that threw everything into chaos. It arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Zelda in an official-looking envelope with a Denver postmark. She opened it with Jacob looking over her shoulder, and her hands began to shake as she read. "What is it?" Jacob asked. "It is from a law firm in Denver." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "They represent the estate of Thomas Owens. Apparently, there was more to his estate than just the $300. He owned a building in Denver that he rented out, and he left it to me in his will." A building, a boarding house, apparently. "With 6 rooms and a steady income of $150 a month." She looked up at Jacob, stunned. "They want me to come to Denver to claim it." Jacob was very still. "That is an incredible opportunity." "Yes." She set the letter down carefully. "It is." They did not talk about what it meant. Not that night. Zelda went to bed in her small room behind the post office and lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. $150 a month was more than 3 times what she made as postmistress. It was security, real security, the kind she had not had since her parents died. She could hire someone to help manage the boarding house. She could save money, invest it, build a real future. But it was in Denver, and Jacob was here. Over the next few days, the weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical thing. Jacob did not push, did not ask what she was going to do, but she could see the question in his eyes every time he looked at her. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, they went for a walk along the creek, and Zelda forced herself to speak. "I do not know what to do." Jacob picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay here." The words came out in a rush. "But that feels foolish. This is an opportunity I might never get again. Financial security, a real future. You have a real future here." "Do I?" She turned to face him. "I am the postmistress of a tiny town in Nevada. My eyesight is still failing even with the spectacles. Someday they will not be enough, and then what? I lose my position and have nothing again." Jacob flinched. "You would have me." "Would I?" She hated the way her voice shook. "We have been courting for 2 months, Jacob. You have never once mentioned marriage or a future together. You have never said you love me. Because I have been terrified you would think I was only interested in you for security," he said, his voice rough. "I am a ranch hand, Zelda. I make $40 a month when I am working, and sometimes I do not work for weeks at a time. I have nothing to offer you except myself. Yourself is everything I want." Tears pricked her eyes. "But I need to know that is what you want too. I need to know I am not making another foolish decision based on feelings instead of logic." Jacob closed the distance between them and took her face in his hands. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I have loved you since that first day when you refused to admit you needed help, when you held those letters 3 inches from your face and pretended everything was fine. I love your stubbornness and your kindness and the way you care about every person in this town. I love how you look in the morning with your hair coming loose from its bun, and how you bite your lip when you are concentrating. I love everything about you, and if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life proving it." "Yes," Zelda whispered. "Yes, I will have you." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard. "So what do we do about Denver?" Jacob asked. Zelda thought for a long moment. "We go together. We claim the boarding house and we get married and we start a life there. I thought you wanted to stay in Humboldt. I want to be with you more than I want to stay in any particular place." She took his hand. "But I also want security. I want to know we will be all right even if my eyesight fails completely. The boarding house can give us that." "What about the post office?" "The town council will find another postmistress, and we can still help people with their letters in Denver. We can offer the same service we started here." Jacob smiled slowly. "A scribe service." "Exactly." She felt excitement building in her chest. "We could make it a real business. Help people who cannot read or write, translate documents, handle correspondence for businesses. There would be so much more demand in a city like Denver. We would be quite a team. We already are." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Humboldt church, with Sarah as witness and most of the town in attendance. Zelda wore a dress she sewed herself from blue calico, and Jacob wore his best suit, which Sarah had to let out at the shoulders because he had grown broader since the last time he wore it. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, and when Jacob kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the church. The town council was sorry to see Zelda go, but understood her reasons. They hired a retired school teacher named Mrs. Flynn to take over the post office, and Zelda spent 2 weeks training her on the organizational system and introducing her to all the regular customers. On the last day, Mrs. Flynn looked around the small office and said, "You built something good here, Zelda. I will do my best to maintain it." "I know you will," Zelda said, and meant it. They left Humboldt on a bright April morning, their belongings packed into 2 trunks and loaded onto the stage. Sarah hugged her brother fiercely and made Zelda promise to write every week. Clara Donovan, back from Denver after spending her sister's final weeks with her, pressed a small package into Zelda's hands and said, "Thank you for giving me that time with Margaret. I will never forget what you did for me." The stage ride to Denver took 3 days, bouncing over rough roads and stopping at way stations where the food was terrible and the beds were worse. But Zelda did not mind. She sat pressed against Jacob's side, his arm around her shoulders, and they talked about their plans and dreams and fears. At night, in the dubious privacy of the way station rooms, they learned each other's bodies with tender exploration, and Zelda discovered that physical love was something both more awkward and more wonderful than she had imagined. Denver was overwhelming after the quiet of Humboldt. The streets were crowded with people and horses and wagons, the buildings tall and imposing, the noise constant. Zelda's spectacles helped her navigate, but the sheer amount of visual information was exhausting after years of seeing only vague shapes. The boarding house was on Blake Street, a 3-story building with a fresh coat of white paint, and a sign that read Owens' House hanging over the door. Inside, they found clean rooms with simple furniture, a large kitchen, and a current occupancy of 4 tenants, all working men who paid their rent on time and kept to themselves. "It is perfect," Zelda breathed, standing in the front parlor and looking around. "It needs work," Jacob said practically. "The roof is sound, but that back staircase is dangerous, and the kitchen needs updating if you are going to cook for tenants." "We are going to cook for tenants," Zelda corrected. "This is ours, Jacob. We do this together." They spent the first month settling in and learning how to manage the boarding house. Jacob proved to be surprisingly handy, fixing broken stairs and leaky faucets and sticking windows. Zelda managed the books and handled the tenants, and cooked enormous meals that filled the house with warmth and good smells. In the evenings, they sat together in the small office they had set up in what used to be a storage room, and they began to offer their letter writing services to the neighborhood. Word spread quickly. Denver was full of immigrants who could not read or write English, workers who had never learned their letters, families separated by distance, who needed help maintaining correspondence. Within 2 months, Jacob and Zelda had a steady stream of clients, and they charged modest fees that helped supplement the boarding house income. "You have a gift for this," Jacob said one evening, watching Zelda compose a letter for a young Irish woman who wanted to write to her mother back home. "You know exactly what to say." "I just listen to what they want to express and put it into words," Zelda said. But she was pleased by the compliment. Summer came hot and bright, and with it came news that Zelda was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, the signs unmistakable, but when Dr. Wallace confirmed it, she felt a surge of joy mixed with terror. "You are healthy," the doctor assured her. "I see no reason why you should not have a perfectly normal pregnancy and delivery." "What about my eyes?" Zelda asked. "Will the pregnancy affect them?" Dr. Wallace frowned. "It is possible. Some women find their vision changes during pregnancy due to fluid retention and hormonal shifts, but it should return to normal after delivery." It did not return to normal. By her 6th month, Zelda's vision had deteriorated significantly despite the spectacles. She could still see with them, but everything was softer again, harder to focus on. She began relying more on Jacob to read addresses and write out receipts, and she hated the dependence even as she was grateful for his unwavering support. "It is temporary," Jacob kept saying. "The doctor said it would get better after the baby comes," but Zelda was not so sure. Their son was born on a snowy February evening in 1884, after 18 hours of labor that left Zelda exhausted and triumphant. Jacob held the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and when he placed the tiny bundle in Zelda's arms, she felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. "What should we name him?" Jacob asked. Zelda looked down at her son's small face, his eyes squeezed shut and his mouth working. "James," she said, "after your father." "James Quinn," Jacob said, testing it out. "I like that." Her vision did not improve after James was born. If anything, it got worse. By the time the baby was 3 months old, Zelda could barely make out shapes even with her spectacles. She could still manage some tasks by feel and memory, but reading and writing became impossible. "We need to see another specialist," Jacob said. "We cannot afford it." "We can afford it," he said firmly. "The boarding house is doing well, and the letter service brings in steady income. We have savings. We are going to find someone who can help." They saw 3 specialists over the following months. The diagnoses were all the same: progressive degenerative myopia, accelerated by pregnancy. The prognosis was grim. Zelda would likely be completely blind within a year. She took the news with outward calm, thanking the doctors politely and walking out of their offices with her head high. But at night, lying in bed with Jacob's arms around her and James asleep in his cradle nearby, she let herself cry. "I am going to lose everything," she whispered. "I will not be able to work. I will not be able to care for our son properly. I will be a burden." "You will never be a burden," Jacob said fiercely. "And you will not lose everything. You will lose your sight, which is terrible and unfair, but you will not lose your mind or your voice or your ability to love and be loved. We will adapt. We will figure it out together." "How?" "The same way we have figured out everything else, one day at a time." He was right, though Zelda did not fully believe it until she had no choice. By the time James was a year old, in February of 1885, Zelda's vision was reduced to vague shapes and light perception. She could tell the difference between day and night, could sense movement and color in an abstract way, but she could not read or recognize faces or navigate unfamiliar spaces without help. So she adapted. She learned the layout of the boarding house by touch and memory, counting steps and using landmarks. She learned to identify tenants by their voices and footsteps. She learned to cook by feel, measuring ingredients by weight and temperature rather than sight. She learned to care for James through sound and touch, recognizing his different cries and feeling his forehead to check for fever and counting his fingers and toes every night before bed to reassure herself he was whole and healthy. And she learned to rely on Jacob in ways she had never relied on anyone before. He became her eyes. He described the world to her in careful detail. What James looked like as he grew, how the seasons changed the city around them, what their tenants' faces revealed about their moods and troubles. He read to her every evening, books and newspapers and letters from friends back in Humboldt. He wrote out everything for the letter service, taking dictation from their clients and from Zelda herself as she composed responses. "I could not do this without you," she told him one night as they sat together in the office, James asleep upstairs and the house quiet around them. "You could," Jacob said. "You are the strongest person I know, but I am glad you do not have to." The letter service grew beyond what either of them had imagined. Jacob's reputation as a careful, confidential scribe spread through Denver's working-class neighborhoods, and soon they had clients coming from across the city. He handled correspondence for immigrants, wrote legal documents for people settling disputes, composed business letters for shopkeepers who could barely write their names. And Zelda, even without her sight, proved invaluable. She could hear what clients really meant beneath their words, could craft letters that captured emotion and intent with perfect precision. "Tell me what you want to say to your mother," she would prompt gently, and as the client talked, she would weave their words into something beautiful and true. Jacob would write it down exactly as she dictated, and the client would leave with tears in their eyes, amazed that someone had finally understood what they meant. By 1886, they had enough business to hire an assistant, a young man named Peter who had neat handwriting and a quiet manner. This freed up Jacob to focus on the more complex correspondence, while Zelda handled consultations, and Peter managed the basic letter writing. Life settled into a rhythm. Zelda ran the boarding house by day, managing tenants and overseeing meals with the help of a woman named Mrs. Chen, who came in to cook and clean. In the afternoons and evenings, she worked on the letter service, meeting with clients and dictating responses while Jacob or Peter wrote. James grew into a cheerful, energetic toddler who seemed to instinctively understand his mother's limitations and would take her hand to lead her places, describing what he saw in his simple 3-year-old vocabulary. "Mama, look, bird." He would cry, and Zelda would crouch down and let him guide her hand to feel the wooden bird toy he was holding, and she would describe the bird's colors and sounds from memory until James was satisfied. In the spring of 1887, a letter arrived that brought news from Humboldt. Sarah wrote to tell them that the post office had burned down in an electrical fire, and while no one was hurt, Mrs. Flynn had decided to retire rather than rebuild. The town council was looking for a new postmistress, and several people had suggested they reach out to Zelda and Jacob to see if they would consider returning. "They know I am blind," Zelda said when Jacob read the letter aloud. "They do." Sarah made that clear in her letter. "But she says the council believes we could manage it together, with you handling the organizational side and me handling the visual tasks." He paused. "They are offering a significant salary increase, $60 a month plus free housing." "What do you think?" Zelda asked. "I think Denver has been good to us. The boarding house is successful, the letter service is thriving, and we have built a real life here." He took her hand. "But I also think Humboldt is home in a way Denver never quite has been, and I miss the open spaces and the slower pace." "I miss it too," Zelda admitted. "But what about James? Would it be fair to take him from the city to a small town?" "James would thrive anywhere," Jacob said. "He is like you that way. Adaptable and strong." They talked about it for days, weighing the options. "Finally," Zelda said, "I want to go back. Not to run the post office, but to be closer to the people we care about. We could keep the boarding house here and hire a manager. Use the income from it to supplement whatever we make in Humboldt. We could even continue the letter service on a smaller scale." "You want to keep working the letter service?" "Of course. It is what we do. It is who we are." So they returned to Humboldt in the summer of 1887, to a town that welcomed them back with genuine joy. The post office had been rebuilt in a new location, larger and more modern, with a separate office space perfect for their letter service. Jacob took on the official postmaster role while Zelda managed the organizational system and client consultations. The people of Humboldt quickly learned that Zelda's blindness had not diminished her capabilities. She still remembered every family in town, still knew exactly where each piece of mail should go, still had an uncanny ability to solve problems and connect people. And with Jacob's assistance, the post office ran more efficiently than ever. The letter service became an integral part of the community. People came not just for help with correspondence, but for advice, for a sympathetic ear, for the comfort of having someone truly listen to them. Zelda and Jacob became the town's unofficial counselors, helping people navigate disputes, express difficult emotions, and stay connected to loved ones far away. James started school in 1888, and he proved to be a bright, curious child who loved learning. He became his mother's greatest ally, describing everything he saw with increasing sophistication and reading to her every evening from his school books. In 1889, Zelda gave birth to a daughter they named Julia. The pregnancy was easier than her first, and while her vision did not deteriorate further, it did not improve either. She was still blind, but she had learned to live with it, to find joy and purpose despite it. More children followed. A second son, Joseph, in 1891. Twin daughters, Jane and Josephine, in 1893. Each pregnancy brought its own challenges, but Zelda navigated them with the same determination she brought to everything else, and Jacob was there for every moment, steady and patient and unfailingly supportive. The letter service expanded again. By the mid-1890s, Zelda and Jacob were handling correspondence for people across northern Nevada, offering services by mail for those who could not travel to Humboldt. They hired 2 more assistants and trained them in the careful, confidential methods that had made their reputation. In 1895, on their 11th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Zelda on a picnic by the creek where he had first told her he loved her. "I have been thinking," he said as they sat on a blanket, the sound of water running over stones nearby. "About what?" "About how we started. You were losing your sight and terrified of losing your independence. I was a drifter between jobs who had no idea what he wanted from life. And somehow we found each other and built this incredible thing together." "It is incredible, is it not?" Zelda turned her face toward where she knew he sat. "Sometimes I cannot believe how fortunate we have been." "I want to make sure it continues," Jacob said. "The work we do, helping people with their words, it matters, and I want to find a way to make it last beyond us." "What do you mean?" "I mean I want to write a manual. A guide for how to be a good scribe, how to listen to what people really mean, how to craft letters that capture truth and emotion. I want to train people properly so this service can continue even after we are gone." Zelda reached out and found his hand, squeezing it. "That is a wonderful idea." They spent the next 2 years working on the manual, with Jacob writing and Zelda dictating from her years of experience. They covered everything from the practical aspects of handwriting and formatting to the more subtle arts of listening and interpretation. They included sample letters for different situations, advice for handling difficult clients, and guidelines for maintaining confidentiality. When it was finished in 1897, they published it through a small Denver press, calling it The Scribe's Handbook, a guide to professional correspondence services. It sold modestly at first, mostly to people in their network, but word spread, and soon they were receiving letters from scribes and letter writers across the West, thanking them for creating a resource that legitimized and elevated their work. "We did something important," Jacob said one evening, reading aloud from a letter of praise they had received from a woman in San Francisco who had started her own correspondence service based on their methods. "We did," Zelda agreed. She was 40 now, her hair touched with gray and her face lined from years of squinting before she lost her sight entirely, but she felt more content than she ever had. "We helped people connect with each other. We gave voices to the voiceless. That is worth more than money or recognition." "Though the money does not hurt," Jacob said with a laugh. "No," Zelda admitted. "The money does not hurt." They were prosperous now in ways they never could have imagined in those early days. The boarding house in Denver continued to generate steady income under the management of Peter, who had taken over when they moved back to Humboldt. The post office provided a reliable salary. The letter service brought in enough to support their assistants and still have money left over. They had savings in the bank and a comfortable house on the edge of town with enough land for a garden, and a small stable for the horses Jacob loved. But more than the financial security, they had built something lasting. Their 5 children were healthy and happy, growing into capable young people who understood the value of helping others. James, now 14, was already talking about becoming a teacher. Julia, at 9, showed signs of her mother's gift for language and spent hours writing stories. Joseph was mechanically minded and loved helping his father fix things. The twins, at 5, were still wild and unpredictable but brought constant joy to the household. The years passed peacefully. The children grew and married and started families of their own. James became a teacher in Winnemucca. Julia married a newspaper editor in Reno and started her own advice column. Joseph took over the maintenance of the post office and expanded it to include telegraph services. The twins both moved to California, but they wrote long, detailed letters that Jacob read aloud to Zelda every week. Zelda and Jacob continued their work into their 60s, though at a slower pace. They trained young people in the art of professional correspondence, passing on the skills and values that had served them so well. They watched with pride as their former assistants started their own services in other towns, spreading the model they had pioneered. In 1910, on a warm June evening, Zelda and Jacob sat on the porch of their home, listening to the sounds of Humboldt settling into night. They were both in their 70s now, their hair white and their movements slower, but their minds remained sharp and their love for each other as strong as ever. "You ever regret it?" Zelda asked. "Tying yourself to a blind woman?" "Never," Jacob said immediately. "Not for one single moment. You gave me purpose and love and a life more rich than I ever imagined possible. How could I regret that? I could not have done any of it without you." "We did it together," Jacob corrected. "That is what marriage is. 2 people building something neither could build alone." Zelda reached out and felt for his hand, finding it easily after decades of practice. Their fingers intertwined, calloused and familiar, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out overhead, invisible to Zelda but described so many times by Jacob that she could see them perfectly in her mind. They continued working for several more years, finally retiring in 1913 when Jacob's hands developed severe arthritis that made writing difficult. By then, their legacy was secure. The Scribe's Handbook had gone through multiple printings and was used by correspondence services across the country. Their children and grandchildren visited regularly, filling the house with laughter and life. The community they had served for so long honored them with a celebration that brought people from all over Nevada to express their gratitude. "We did good work," Jacob said that night, lying in bed with Zelda curled against his side. "We did," she agreed. "We helped people speak when they had no voice. We connected people across distance and circumstance. We built something that mattered. And we loved each other," Jacob added. "That mattered most of all." Zelda felt tears prick her sightless eyes. "Yes, that mattered most of all." They lived peacefully for several more years, enjoying retirement and the constant stream of visiting family. Jacob's arthritis worsened, but he remained active, working in the garden and helping maintain the house. Zelda's health remained good despite her blindness, and she continued to offer advice to the young woman who had taken over the letter service at the post office. Jacob died first, in his sleep on a cold January night in 1918, with Zelda beside him. She felt him slip away, felt the moment his breathing stopped and his hand went still in hers, and she experienced a grief so profound it felt like her own heart had stopped beating. But she survived it, as she had survived everything else. Her children rallied around her, and the community supported her, and she learned to navigate life without the partner who had been her eyes and her heart for over 40 years. She lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about the early days of Humboldt and the work she and Jacob had done. She talked about the importance of words, of really listening to people, of finding ways to connect across all the barriers that separated human beings from each other. On a sunny April morning in 1923, Zelda Owens Quinn died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. She was buried next to Jacob in the Humboldt Cemetery, under a shared headstone that reads simply, "Jacob and Zelda Quinn. They gave voice to the voiceless and loved each other always." Their children gathered after the funeral and talked about their parents' legacy. The boarding house in Denver was still operating under family management. The methods outlined in the Scribe's Handbook were still being taught and used. The letter service in Humboldt continued, run by one of their former assistants who trained new scribes in the careful, compassionate approach Zelda and Jacob had pioneered. But more than any business or book, their greatest legacy was the demonstration that love and partnership could overcome any obstacle. That blindness was not the end of usefulness or purpose. That helping others was the truest form of success. That two people who chose to build something together could create ripples that spread far beyond their own lives. James, now 64 and recently retired from teaching, stood at his parents' grave and remembered being a small child, taking his mother's hand to lead her through the house, describing the world for her. He remembered his father's patient voice reading aloud every evening. He remembered the constant stream of people coming to the post office, seeking help with their words, and leaving with tears in their eyes because someone had finally understood what they meant to say. "They showed us how to live," he said to his siblings, who stood around him in the cemetery. "They showed us that challenges were just problems to be solved, that limitations could be adapted to, that love was strong enough to carry you through anything." "Yes," Julia said quietly, "they did." The Quinn family left the cemetery that day carrying with them the lessons Zelda and Jacob had taught, ready to pass them on to the next generation and the next. And in Humboldt, Nevada, in the post office where Zelda had once sorted mail by touch alone and Jacob had read addresses aloud in his steady voice, the work they started continued, connecting people through words and helping the voiceless find their voice, one letter at a time.